If you started working in BI around 2010, you either were working with or were hearing your friends ranting and raving about how cool Tableau was. At this point, Tableau was running rampant everywhere. And if you don't believe me, just check out these articles back from 2012, 2013, where Deloitte was, signing contracts for 10,000 users on Tableau. And there was a growth rate of 2,500 customers annually, if not more, for Tableau as it was kind of getting out there. And honestly, it was doing something that many other startups aren't doing today, and it was actually profitable at the time. It was the BI tool of the era. Now, it wasn't cloud-based because it really started back in 2003, back prior to anyone really thinking about the cloud, but it was easy to use. It was, honestly, as someone who started with Tableau as their BI tool and then went to SSRS and wanted to cry, it was just easy to use, right? Like you could just quickly drag and drop and at least MVP a dashboard in a day. Like you just put it together and show it to someone and, start working through what they didn't like or liked very quickly. Not to mention that their community was great. It was easy to ask questions online and it was just really easy to work with. And honestly, this was kind of a problem. In my video about Looker versus Dashboard, you'll notice I haven't talked about Looker yet. Well, let's talk about kind of the zeitgeist of the moment and kind of why I believe Looker kind of started taking over, or at least started gaining more traction. And the truth is, Tableau was easy to use, like freakishly easy, like maybe dangerously easy. I remember writing an article back then about how dangerous Tableau was because it was so easy to just start creating calculations everywhere. And, it didn't allow you to have this software mindset when you approach building it. And in fact, I talked to people who are like, yeah, you need to approach even dashboards like software. And that wasn't there in Tableau. So that was kind of a problem because you could just build a dashboard and there was no maintenance or software development lifecycle wrapped around it. There was nothing, no version control. If you created a metric in one dashboard, maybe you were smart enough to put in a data set with Tableau, but you probably didn't. You probably just rebuilt a new dashboard and now had to create, new metrics in that new dashboard that were the exact same metrics as your previous one. And if you updated that, well, what happened? If you updated one, you had to remember to update the other 10 versions of that metric. And it was just chaos. And that's where Looker came in. And we're kind of seeing a trend in this series, right? Where I've talked about Snowflake, I've talked about DBT, sorry about the audio in that video. But if you've seen kind of a trend in those two videos, what you'll notice is the kind of technology prior to those, DBT, Snowflake, ended up pushing the adoption for the newer versions for things like DBT or Snowflake, because the previous ones had issues, and then the new technologies were great at marketing how they weren't like the old ones. But let's have an honest discussion about Tableau versus Looker, because the truth is there are great use cases for both. And to say one is better than the other, to say that one has solved the problems that the other one doesn't, isn't accurate. It's more accurate to say that one does a great job in some cases and the other one does a great job in other cases. And some companies will not be able to afford one of them because it's crazy expensive, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And others, might not even have the staff to manage the other. So let's compare Tableau versus Looker in this video. And let's start with the most obvious thing, which is, well, costs, because costs need to be talked with upfront. Now, to me, the funny thing about Tableau is that many people find it expensive, but when we compare it to a lot of other BI tools, it's pretty much either comparable or about the same. So when we look at pricing, they've kind of got a decent pricing structure, whether you do Tableau Online or their kind of classic Tableau, which we'll talk about here in a second. Tableau Online basically breaks down pricing into like creator, explorer, or viewer. And basically, if you're a creator, it'll be about $70 a month, totaling to about $840 a year. If you're an explorer, basically you can edit existing dashboards with the Explorer, whereas a creator, you can think about, you can do everything: create a dashboard, build a dashboard, share them, publish them, etc. The Explorer, you can just edit existing dashboards. And for that cost, it's $42 a month. Whereas just a viewer, so just someone you can imagine that views the dashboard, it's $15 a month. And there's a few other smaller kind of iterations of that, but I think those are the three main ones most people think of when you're thinking about buying a dashboard. Now, honestly, initially, this is pretty inexpensive if your team is small. It gets very expensive. For example, if you remember my example of Deloitte having 10,000 license, that was a few years back, and I think it might have been a slightly different pricing back then. But even if it was like, let's say $50 a month for 10,000, I mean, you can do the math for how much that would have cost. And more than likely, they got a deal, but it still would have been astronomically expensive for all of those licenses. So you'll see it's pretty cheap. Again, if you have a small team, if you have 10 creators, honestly, you're going to spend about $10,000 a year, which can be very expensive if data isn't your focus, but if data is your focus, that's very inexpensive. And the thing is, especially once you start comparing this to Looker, it's arguably $10,000 is very cheap, because Looker, when you look at it, you're going to first figure out that they don't really list pricing up front. You can find some pricing on AWS if you're to buy Looker through them, but more than likely, if you contact Looker sales representatives, which I have done in the past multiple times, or talk to other consultants, you'll get multiple levels of pricing. And generally, you might have a few license kind of up front, or like few like creator type users up front, but that baseline, like where they basically expect you to pay for the very first few, generally costs you about $30,000 to $50,000 just up front. Maybe you'll get a few creators on that, but just up front, that's the start. So most people, as you can imagine, don't want to pay that much money. So this makes Looker kind of hard to adopt from up front. It's very expensive up front. Now from there, Looker has a very similar breakdown where you've got kind of viewer or kind of developer. And again, here you'll see that pricing ranges from about $400 for essentially a viewer to about $1,700 for developer. So one, it's definitely a lot more expensive for a viewer, right? Where as Tableau would have cost you about $10 or $15, sorry, for viewer. Now you're paying almost $30, a little more. So it's almost double the price for a viewer. And in fact, I was doing an analysis where I was trying to help a company figure out what embedded analytics tool they would use. And Looker ended up basically saying like, oh, it's going to be about $3 million based on the number of viewers they were going to have. And then they told me they were going to give me a 90% discount, which is personally laughable. It's like, that's not a discount at this point. That's just a way of me making me feel good. So as you can see, pricing is very different in terms of, Looker versus Tableau. But let's talk about Looker versus Tableau kind of from a feature set and kind of what differentiates them. Because if you remember me referencing earlier, Tableau, although a great tool, is kind of missing a lot of components in terms of wrapping software development processes around Tableau and how you build dashboards. And Looker, on the other hand, tries to add that in. And that's kind of one of the big differences. That's kind of what Looker did in terms of trying to differentiate itself in terms of dashboarding tools. So let's kind of go through an overview about Tableau and Looker to dive into kind of what the major differences are. And so if we look at Tableau, honestly, it's an easy drag and drop tool where you can honestly just either pick queries or tables that you've pre-developed or data sets that you've created in other Tableau dashboards and connect to them, and then easily take that data and kind of just fiddle with it, drag and drop things around. You can honestly make some of the prettiest dashboards, I think, in Tableau. I think that's the thing I've always loved about Tableau is it is very aesthetic. You have a lot of opportunity to kind of have some creative vision or do something a little more unique. I don't think Looker provides the same level of kind of like aesthetic or options in terms of making your dashboard beautiful. I think of Looker as more functional. And so I think that's something that Tableau has. It's very easy to use. It's very pretty. It makes very pretty dashboards. And pretty much anyone can get started if they at least either understand some basics of SQL or how to connect to a data set, which again, can be good and can be bad. Now, when you compare this to Looker, Looker is personally very different. It's much more functional. Its dashboards are good enough. They're not, you're not going to build anything extravagantly beautiful. You can, but I don't think it's as creative or it isn't as free. But what it does have that's very unique is a lot of its methodologies or a lot of what's put around it, its features are really designed to make you treat your dashboard more like a software component rather than just a dashboard. Starting with its kind of core feature, which is LookML. So what is LookML? It sounds like machine learning. I know it came in 2012. Machine learning, ML, that abbreviation wasn't used as much, but LookML is completely different. LookML is a dependency language like Make, as opposed to an imperative language like C or Ruby. LookML provides predefined data types and syntax for data modeling. LookML syntax has a structure that is clear and easy to learn. I would maybe take a little shot at that. It's not that easy to learn. LookML is independent of particular SQL dialects and encapsulates SQL expressions to support SQL implementation. Okay, so that sounds really kind of abstract, honestly. Basically, LookML lets you define very similar SQL expressions in its own specific manner. Like, let's take a look at kind of this LookML example. You'll see there's some similarities. You see some joins. You see some references of columns. Maybe you occasionally see an aggregate. What this lets you do is essentially define an entity. It's kind of like what Palantir's trying to do with ontologies. I'm not going to take a shot at it, but I'm just saying, there's a lot of layers of doing like semantic layers and things of that nature, and where does it belong, and kind of what is it? We've been doing this for a long time. SAP has been doing this. Everyone's been kind of doing this in some way or another. And LookML is just trying to provide a way of doing it in such a way that you can now encapsulate that logic of like a metric or maybe an entity in, again, LookML, and then more importantly, provide version control so you're not constantly repeating yourself. Because what happens in Tableau, and I think I referenced this earlier, is, okay, let's say you have a query with a metric in it or a value, and you define that in one dashboard. But now you need another dashboard, but you have some other stuff you want to add in there as well. Well, what you're going to end up doing is inadvertently recalculating it in another dashboard with another query. So now you've got two queries that do the same thing. Now, okay, that's fine. But what happens when that value changes or when you need to recalculate that value because there's, you're changing how you're calculating it? Well, you need to remember everywhere you've calculated that value. And you probably, one, won't, and two, there's no version control. So if you do it wrong in both places, now you're gonna have to remember what the previous one was. So basically what LookML did was try to simplify that whole process. And when you really look at the rest of Looker, again, it does allow you to make dashboards, but that's kind of the major difference. Tableau is really, I think, developed more as a dashboarding only tool, and software development, lifecycle, things of that nature were not considered. Repeatability, things of that nature. Whereas LookML really takes more of an engineering approach to dashboards. Implementing version control, implementing, trying to reduce repeatability, dry development methodology, not trying to repeat yourself, just trying to build that in. So I think it just kind of started from a different base. Also, it's important to note, sorry, I forgot to mention this, Tableau was built originally as a desktop application, and Looker came around 2012 and thus was built as a cloud application. That makes a major difference because, Tableau now does have Tableau Online, but Looker always was 100% online. And I think this kind of does show in Tableau Online when you kind of use it. There are some finicky things if you ever use Tableau Online. For example, I hate their save feature. Like if you do not save your Tableau dashboard, and maybe there's a checkbox somewhere to make sure it auto saves, but if you don't save it, it will just go away. I've definitely worked on a dashboard for 30 minutes and then forgotten to save. And then for some reason, you have a weird thing with Tableau Online, like there's a weird connection, it decides to refresh and you lose everything. And that's really messed up. Whereas Looker likely won't have that issue. So that's just a general overview of Looker versus Tableau. Again, what's the core difference? I think the core difference here from this level is that Looker came with more of a software development lifecycle approach, whereas Tableau, it's just a dashboard and you're gonna have to figure out processes around that. Now, when we compare features of Tableau to Looker, it's already kind of slightly different. Obviously, they both build dashboards. That part is the same. One of the differences, or at least one of the features that Tableau offers that I'm not a huge fan of as someone that's more of a data engineer, is Tableau Prep, just because its goal is to create self-service analytics, which, just to be clear for anyone out there who hears any account executive ever hear that term, Tableau has been trying to do that for the last at least decade. So if you hear any new tool offering the same service, understand that this is much harder to do than just offering, it in your website copy. Self-service analytics is hard, but Tableau Prep can help to some degree, but it again encapsulates a lot of like what should be code or logic essentially in Tableau itself. And so one, you get vendor lock-in, and two, version control, testing, things of that nature don't occur in this process. So you should probably do it outside in the data warehouse if you're really going to add more preparation. The goal is to make it easy for analysts to work with, but I really, again, as more of a data person, believe that Tableau Prep is just a way of increasing vendor lock-in and not providing the right value from a data person perspective. But again, I'm always going to be biased as more of a data warehouse person who believes logic belongs more likely on the data side and database side and not on the dashboard side. It just makes things harder. That aside, the one thing that Tableau and Looker kind of do have is they both have actions, but they're both different. So Tableau actions, if you've never used it, are great. I've used it to kind of help the ability of you clicking on a link, like when you kind of can make a whole URL link and put it together. So you can go to the exact invoice that you're looking at in a dashboard. That's actually personally very helpful, but it's really just a get action. There's nothing you can do with it. You're not allowed to take action with that data. You just have this, URL you can go to. Whereas Looker provides Looker actions, and they actually allow you to run HTTP post requests. And for those people who are out there who don't know what that is, it basically means you can post or do something wherever the endpoint is. Endpoint just being some sort of URL, and you can say oh, maybe add in this data, or send an email, or do something based off of data. That way you're actually taking actions and not just looking at a dashboard. It lets you take data from just being purely, informational and taking action on it, making it a little more clear and easy in terms of where you can take action. For example, on Acrotrend's website, they give the example of the fact that, you could dump data straight into a custom Salesforce object, which wouldn't add much value, right? Instead, from Looker, if you can push, something to create some sort of campaign around either a user or something similar to that in Salesforce, that might be more valuable, right? You can actually take some sort of action. And again, you do need to create processes around this. This isn't just something that's going to happen, but you can actually create HTTP requests that do more than just get, which would be just getting kind of a link and showing it back to you, but actually post actions and do things. Another interesting feature from the fact that Looker is cloud-based is the fact that Looker offers what's called Looker Marketplace. Now, what is Looker Marketplace? Well, Looker Marketplace is a central location for finding, deploying, and managing many types of Looker content. So this could be Looker blocks, applications, and visualizations, and plugins. Again, Looker is focused on not just allowing you to build dashboards, but build repeatable components, right? These blocks are basically components that you can reuse. So instead of having to build all your own logic all over again, you can reuse components that already exist. And that's kind of the point of Look and Looker and all of that, is that unlike Tableau, which doesn't necessarily provide this out of the box, right? Like there's no ability to let's reuse someone else's component. You don't have that easily. There are ways, but it's not built as a core component. This is how Looker was built. All of its features are really built to treat, again, dashboards more like software products and not just like dashboards. Crazy idea. So as you can see, there is a major difference between Looker and Tableau. And by the end of this, you must be thinking, wow, Ben, Looker must be the only thing that we should use and you must really enjoy it. And that's not the case. And I want to tell you my personal thoughts of when maybe Looker makes more sense than Tableau, because I think there's honestly good reasons. First of all, I think the most obvious reason of why you should use Looker versus Tableau, or at least why you should use Tableau versus Looker, is Tableau is, again, arguably cheaper. So if your team, one, is not trying to put a ton of investment right now into dashboards, yeah, you should probably go with Tableau, because more than likely, if you're just putting out 2 dashboards, 3 dashboards, you don't need all of this extra kind of layers of, version control and things of that nature added into your whole process. One, it's going to slow you down. 2, you have to have people that are skilled in that area, like LookML, to build it. And more than likely, that's expensive. I mean, one, Looker in itself is already going to cost you at least $30,000 to $50,000. And then on top of that, an analytics engineer, who's likely who you're going to need to hire at the very minimum, is going to cost you another $150,000 to $200,000. Whereas Tableau can probably be managed by an analyst and, again, only costs about $70 a month. And then maybe, you've got 3 to 10 viewers. So at the end of the day, you're probably only spending at most $3,000 to $5,000 a year. So already from a cost perspective, there's a very different level here. So if your company isn't looking to majorly invest in dashboard right now, Tableau is a great place to start. And honestly, maybe you can continue if you only have 3, 4, or 5 main dashboards that you're really looking at. And your team is generally small. Now, as your team grows, there is kind of this point where you're likely going to hit maybe a need for Looker. If you've got 6, 7 kind of data focused people who are doing everything from data engineering to analytics engineering, there's a lot of needs for dashboards. You're building, multiple dashboards. There's a lot of repeatability that's occurring. Again, that's the main kind of value, I think, is trying to reduce that repeatability so that if you ever have to migrate logic or something of that nature, it's very easy to do. Looker starts making more sense. It really does. Even from a cost perspective, it does provide this framework that can be very beneficial. But if you have a small team and data is not your main focus right now, and that's okay, by the way. Yes, we all want to be data driven, but most companies are struggling to become data driven because they're trying to use too complex tools to manage very little data or very few dashboards. For example, if you're spending $50,000 on your Looker license and you have 2, 3, analytics engineers, data engineers, and 4 dashboards, you could probably get away with Tableau. And if you're trying to reduce costs, again, if your goal is eventually to kind of continue to scale up, then you can make that choice into Looker if that's your eventual goal in 2 to 5 years. But if this is where you're going to stay for the next 2 to 5 years, then one could argue that Tableau, again, would be better because it's going to be cheaper and it's going to allow you to move a lot faster. At least in the beginning. Again, that's the big thing. It's Looker is good and you can build faster once you've built that base infrastructure, but it's going to be slow to start. Right? You got to think, you have to build all this LookML, you have to build all this process. Whereas with Tableau, you can just build a few queries and kind of build and rely on that for now. So it is this pros and cons where it's like, do you want a lot of kind of heavy infrastructure around your BI, or do you just want to build a few quick dashboards because that's all that management needs? It really is going to be that trade-off, and that's what I try to help with a lot of my clients figure out is, hey, where are you at? What do you need now? Do you need a Looker? Do you need a Tableau? And helping them kind of figure out which one would be best, because again, this could be a $50,000 mistake if you pick the wrong tool. And if you haven't seen my video on Snowflake or dbt, I would say you should check that out, because I think there's a lot of stuff that has changed over the last 10 years in terms of how we've done data, all because of a lot of things that happened a decade ago. So check that out in terms of kind of understanding the cultural zeitgeist of data, how we got here, what we're doing, and things of that nature. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.